That was fun. So it's Baptism Sunday. You know, throughout my life, I have actually been entertained quite a lot by baptism stories. And just recently, I was entertained by this one. It says, so this guy in a dress tried to drown me. And I kid you not, my family just stood there taking pictures. So sort of this imagining of an infant who's being baptized and what they must think about someone in a gown or a dress trying to to put water all over them while your parents and family stand by and take pictures. As the daughter of a pastor, I have certainly witnessed lots of baptisms, but my dad used to get on a roll at the dinner table from time to time telling some of his favorite baptism stories. So since I was very little, there's one that has always stuck out, so I'm just going to share it with you like we were sitting around the dinner table. It was early in his ministry as a Southern Baptist pastor, and so he was pastoring 4 different country churches. And so he would go to one every Sunday throughout the month, you know. So they met once a month and he'd go to all 4. Well, they would sometimes come together to do baptisms, and they were always, because they were out in the country churches in South Alabama, then they would come together at the river or the creek to do a baptismal service. Of course, Baptists believe you should be immersed. And so I learned at an early age all of the rubrics of actually immersing someone, right? I mean, there's a whole thing to it about how you tell them to stand, how you hold their neck, how you use the handkerchief over their nose, and it's just a whole thing, right? So my dad would tell this story about being at a creek in South Alabama where he was baptizing about 6 people, and there was one woman who was very large. Now, my dad was also very large, and he would always say she was rotund because he thought that was a much more lovely way of saying that someone was big. And so she was apparently really, really large. And so he had already worried about how this was going to go with her, right? And so he had given her very specific instructions. And she came into the creek, had her flip-flops on and, you know, whatever she had chosen to wear. And she steps up beside him, and he gets his hand right on her neck and the handkerchief ready, and he says to her, now keep your feet on the bottom. He puts the handkerchief on her nose, immerses her, and before he gets her up out of the water, her feet go up and her flip-flops start floating down the creek. That's just, and what do you do after that? Right? I mean, what kind of spiritual moment do you make when someone's flip-flops is going with, you know, going down the creek? So I have been entertained many times by the different stories of baptism, without a doubt. And I think if we went around the room today and we asked all of us to share any baptism stories that we've either witnessed or been through ourselves, we would get all sorts of things. And in this room in particular, because we come from so many different places, those stories would be rich. Some of them would be indeed about immersion. And those are probably the stories that tend to be the funniest because people do such crazy things around immersion. Or some of you would talk about being sprinkled or having a priest put water on your head. Some of you would talk about being baptized as an infant. Others about being baptized as an adult. There would be all kinds of stories. And if we looked more deeply into those stories, we probably realize that all of the ritual around baptism, about the motions you're supposed to go through, the exact correct way to put water on somebody's head 3 times, the exact words that you're supposed to say, that all of us might have a different understanding of that depending on where we came from. And if you were listening to the contemporary reading this morning, did you hear that basic message about how we may have gotten caught up in the rubric, caught up in the ritual, in the right thing to do and the right thing to say in order for someone to be baptized? And then we add a whole other layer of rubric on it, which is what you have to believe or what you have to have experienced in order to be baptized. So that's a lot of stuff, isn't it? And so I was struck as we come to Baptism Sunday one more time. In rereading the baptism of Jesus, I think for the first time it struck me differently. And here's how it struck me differently. Remember the story. It says that Jesus went into the Jordan River, and it really does not say anything about how John baptized him. The next words are that as he came out of the water, the heavens opened up. The Spirit came to Jesus like a dove. Yeah? And he heard God say, I love you, you're mine, and I'm proud of you. Notice, there's not a whole lot of instruction in this story about how you're supposed to do it, or how many times you're supposed to say something, or how many times you wave the sprinkler. There's not any word in there about what you're supposed to say while you're doing those things. So it might be, my friends, that we've gotten a little too wrapped up in the ritual and the rubric, and we've missed the really important thing about baptism. I think Jesus' own baptism would suggest that what we've missed is that the most important part about baptism is the experience we have when we're baptized. And Jesus' own experience sort of sets the pace for that, which is that in the use of water, in whatever way we use it, and for whatever has brought us to a place of baptism, there is this moment when we get a little something from heaven in baptism. We get a little something from heaven. And what is that? The heavens open up. It's a little something from heaven to say, I see you. The heavens open up. And then we get the Spirit with us, like a dove, or like many things. The heavens open up. The Spirit is there. And the words of God are, you're mine, and I'm proud of you. Just little pieces of heaven that come to us in the act of baptism. Now, perhaps what's most important about this is that if we focus on the experience of baptism, then it would call us to realize that baptism is probably not just a moment in time. It's not a one-time thing. Now, in my growing up in the Southern Baptist tradition, you are one and done, man. You're baptized, then you cannot be undone. And you don't do it again either, by the way. But when I think about Jesus in the baptismal waters, and I think about him having an experience of heavens opening up and the Spirit being with him and God affirming Jesus to say, you're mine, I'm proud of you, then I think we have to at least consider the possibility that baptism happens to us many times in our lives, and it may or may not involve water. I wonder what the people around Jesus that day who were watching this happen, I wonder what they felt. Because I doubt it had much to do with however he ended up getting water on him, but more to do with what they watched Jesus experience. So baptism is also an act of community, where we all experience something as we watch baptism. I'm reminded of Lady Gaga. She wrote a song called On the Edge of Glory. Familiar? And the story that goes with that song is that her grandfather was about to die. And on the night that they felt like he was going to pass, she and her father were at her home, and they were sitting on the piano bench. And she said, you know, my dad was so sad because we knew we were going to lose his father, my grandfather, that night. And so the two of them began to put this song together. Because Lady Gaga said to her father, you know, we have to realize that Granddaddy is on the edge of glory tonight. That this is a moment of glory for him. And that he has won. He won the love of your mother. He's won a beautiful life and many things that blessed him. And now he's on the edge of this glorious moment. And that's how The Edge of Glory was written. Hanging on a moment of truth. I'm on the edge of glory. Hanging on a moment with you. That feels like baptism to me. Where we hang on a moment of truth, when we get a little something from heaven, when we see something we have not been able to see before. Have you had a lot of those times in your life? When all of a sudden you see something you didn't see before, some event happens, and now there is an awareness that just wasn't there before. That's when the heavens have opened up. That's when the Spirit has come to say, look, you get it now, don't you? And I love you and I'm proud of you. I believe those baptisms come over and over again in our lives if we're willing to notice them. I'll tell you, having presided over quite a few baptisms myself, there are a few that have completely changed me. It's almost like I had a baptism while I was offering baptism to someone else. Let me tell you a few of the most profound. One was a trans woman who had said to me, I want to be baptized for who I really am, with the name that I choose. I've already been baptized, but not as me, not as completely who I am. And so when it came to doing her baptism, and I saw that her hairdresser came to stand with her. And I put my hands on her with water to say, let me call you by your name. Let me understand who you really are. Because her hairdresser already understood. I felt the heavens open up. I felt that in my own soul, that the Spirit was right there and teaching us all, even though it was her baptism. I've watched drug addicts come and say, you know, I think I've turned the corner. I think that if I'll stay with it and understand that this is a disease that I will have to look after my whole life, I think I've turned the corner. And so I need to be baptized in a state of believing that my life has turned and believing that when I was baptized before, I was numb. I wasn't even able to be present. And so to baptize that man or that woman, that teenager who honestly says, you know, I think the heavens have opened up and the Spirit's with me. And God says, I love you. You're mine. And I'm proud of you for that turn. A little something from heaven. Maybe one of the most profound has been around death. And one that sticks out to me was actually a good many years ago. And I was standing around the hospital bed with a family whose mother was about to pass. There were 6 children. 5 of them were there. The mother was sort of in and out of consciousness, and we knew that she wouldn't be with us for long. The 6th child, who was a daughter, the oldest daughter, was not there. And it was because she had had a falling out with her mother 20 years before, and they had not spoken since. The other children had tried desperately to get the daughter to come, and she had refused. We were standing around the bed singing Amazing Grace, and in walks the daughter. She was quiet, and there was that took the air out of the room. But we all just sort of quietly made room for her to join us, and she held our hands too. And we kept singing, and she just got closer and closer, moving around the circle, getting closer to her mother, and finally made her way right beside her mother and took her mother's hand. There were no words that were exchanged. But if you were witnessing this baptism, you could see. You could see that the heavens had opened up, that the Spirit was there, and that mother and daughter made their peace. And that in the mix there was a little something from heaven where God said, both of you, you're mine, I love you, I'm proud of you. And you can close this circle together. These, don't you think, are all moments of baptism, and chances for us to understand it differently. Martin Luther suggested in his writings that we would be good in the morning when we splash water on our face, to do it 3 times. In the name of the one who opened up the heavens, in the name of the one who sends the Spirit, and in the name of the one who is proud of me and calls me his own, I start my day. That'll change you. So I'll invite you to that suggestion from Martin Luther decades and decades ago. This morning we have an opportunity to do a special baptism of this communion table. We probably mostly think about consecrating things like this in a different way than with water, but we're going to do it with water today because it's Baptism Sunday. This communion table was given and donated to us by Joffrey Saprina, our director of music. And so when Joffrey told me he wanted to do this, and he'd found a place that has big slabs of wood, and he took me there, and he said, I want you to help me figure out what to do about this. And some of the conversation we had about it was, we loved that there was this circular motion to this end of the wood. And imagined that most churches would square it off and box it in, and we were like, no, leave it, let it be like this. And this end was more squared off, and we said, why don't you put some curves in this one? And it's got a crack in it, and we were like, yeah, no, leave it. There's a knot in it. Leave it, because at this table, we're all aware of the broken places and the cracks we have, but we're still invited to this table. And we were like, don't put anything under here, because there's no barriers at our table in this room. Everyone is welcome. We're not going to put up anything that suggests that this isn't a free place to be. I hope you'll get a chance to come look at it. The wood is just beautiful. And so we get a chance to consecrate it this morning. And in a minute, I'm going to ask each of you and all of you to come and to dip your finger in the baptismal bowl. Oh. And Jerry, I'm going to add a little bit of water that you brought me back from the Holy Land into this. And as Diane plays, if you'll just come up and just softly put your fingers in and then touch this table. And perhaps, at least in your heart, be imagining that the heavens open up at this table, that the Spirit comes at this table, and that we're reminded every week that God calls us God's own and is proud of us. And that's a table that everyone can come to, because the rubrics don't matter. What matters is the experience of this table. So it will have in it, this table, the energy from all of you. It will have the love and an intention from all of you in this community, that whoever comes to this table will experience that the heavens open up. So come quietly and with great intention to bless this table. Please come as you feel led. Did you feel the baptism? And so as we consider the rings in this piece of wood that comes from creation, and the story that lies in all the rings of this wood, are all the stories that lie within us, that now have been made part of this table. The moments in our lives when the heavens have opened up and the Spirit has come and we've realized that we belong to God. This is the moment of baptism for us, for each of us and all of us, and for this table. And so now, as Reverend Donna and Reverend Tony and I lay our hands here, I pray that you will join me in this consecration. Holy One, this is a moment in the life of this faith community, a moment for us to recommit ourselves to an open table, a moment for us to realize that symbols matter, that open tables matter. It's a moment for us to recommit ourselves to knowing that God invites us to this table without requirement, that God invites us to be blessed by these gifts every week, that God has sent Jesus to just show us what it's like to come from the baptismal water. And so as this table has now been baptized by your people in this place, God, by their stories, by their baptisms, may it be a place where your love shines, your grace reigns, and where all of God's people can be blessed. May this be so in your many names and in the name of Jesus the Christ. Amen. Amen.